And now we're meeting with Phil Auerbach. He's a specialist on language and is particularly important for this program. Phil, thank you for joining us.
Hello, Bruce. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a
So
pleasure
tell
to
us a
be here.
little bit about you and your clients.
Well, my name is Philip Auerbach. My company is called Auerbach International. And I have a 30-some, it depends how you count it, 31, 32-year-old company, language agency and global marketing agency called Auerbach International, as I said. And we empower clients to expand into other cultures and countries. Um, and personally, I've visited about, well, lived or visited about 56 countries and have studied 8 languages, of which French and Japanese are quite okay. I wouldn't say they're sterling anymore, but they used to be. Used to be better, I should say.
It's interesting. Both my wife and my son also speak Japanese, so it's a language not a lot of Americans speak.
That's very true. Yes, and most of our clients are U.S. companies going abroad, but we also work with foreign companies coming to the U.S.
Good. Well, so as you know, this tutorial is directed to companies from other countries doing business now in the US or about to launch here. So they're coming from countries that certainly have customs and a culture that's different from the USA. And since you're an expert on this topic, can you give us some examples of that did not work out well?
I think it's best to talk instead of specific companies that didn't work out well, to talk about specific principles
Okay.
that did not work out well. Um, one of the fundamental issues is that the United States has what is called at-will employment. Unlike most, well, certainly unlike Europe and most of Asia, Americans can be hired or fired quickly at will, at will of the employer, without a lot of huge severance pay or year-long severance packages or whatever. So that's one major difference that a lot of people are not aware of. Um, Most other cultures are fairly hierarchical in that the boss, one would refer to the boss by his or her surname, Mr. or Ms. So-and-so, Smith, whatever, or sometimes by a title, such as, Bucho-san in Japanese, for example, division manager, um, or in some other more formal way. Whereas the United States is a much more informal culture. And for people who haven't observed it firsthand, it's somewhat shocking um, because Americans like to think that everyone should be your friend or everyone, that basically we like to break down barriers because we had a revolution against all of that about hierarchy and royalty and titles and aristocrats and so forth. So we break down barriers, and most people call each other by their first names, including if you meet someone for the first time, which personally I think is highly impolite, but that's what Americans tend to do anyway. Um, and Americans are also very direct. People say the Germans are very direct. I think Americans are in a way much more direct than the Germans. Um, and so Americans tend to answer yes or no, give give data and facts to back up their position, their arguments, whatever. Um, and they may say statements in a way that foreigners consider to be rude or impolite. So just to be aware that Americans are not deliberately trying to be rude or impolite. It's just that that's the way we are sometimes. So I guess those are the main. Oh, and also dress codes are more relaxed in the U.S. Where Europeans and Asians would most likely wear suits to work. In the United States, it very much depends on the part of the country that you're in, as well as the industry that you're in. So, for example, Silicon Valley and the IT sector is very casual. Shorts and t-shirts tend to reign. Bankers and insurance people and lawyers and so forth tend to wear suits. And again, it depends on what part of the country. Some parts, the East is more formal than the West, and the South is more formal than I think, well, it depends. The South is a mix. It
Mhm.
depends.
So I wonder, can you give us a short list of communications do's and don'ts for companies to consider when they're thinking about expanding their business operations in the US?
Yeah. The United States, as I said, is a very informal business culture, and that translates or means um, various instances and how that happens or how it comes across. So we can do business from San Diego in the far southwest of the country to Maine in the far northeast of the country, and never have met the people we're doing business with. It's just you can get it. You can do an email. You can do a phone call. Um, you can just do some kind of communication, and it doesn't matter where you are. You can automatically do business with people wherever they are in the country based on an email and a phone call. And to foreigners, that is quite shocking because most people value relationships. Relationships in the US are primarily developed um, within a group. So, for example, you might be interested in chess and you might join a chess club. So that's where you would form relationships. Relationships in business are formed in business groups. The group that you might work with, or if you're working on a project together, there may be across departments, and the people from different departments would come together, and you would form relationships with those people in the business that way. Whereas most cultures form relationships before or after you've established a relationship or after someone recommends you to someone else, then you can do business with someone, or then you're more comfortable to do business with someone. Whereas in the United States, that doesn't really matter.
Mhm.
It's just plunge in and do it. Um, Americans are also great problem solvers. So if you don't know how to do something, just tell an American it cannot be done, and especially men, but also women, will immediately work on the way to do it, to find the solution. So America, it's a very sort of optimistic culture in that way, and based again on our history, our revolution, and then the expansion of our country from east to west. There are values that developed, and this was one of them. Self-reliant, very self-reliant, as well as solutions-oriented. So where other peoples, other cultures may, I'll say the word passive, may assume that something cannot be done, or it's not appropriate to do, or it's difficult to do, whatever the case may be, Americans will tend to find the way to do it.
But now, considering that companies have to adapt their messaging for the US market, does that also follow for their websites and other marketing communications? I mean, for example, do they require two or even more language options in their website?
Yes, first of all, if they're going to do websites, yes, the website should absolutely be in English, in American English, and probably in Spanish, and that depends, and I'll get to that in a moment.
Mhm.
But the website should also be culturally adapted. Any website should be culturally adapted for the target country. So um, many people think that, oh, we have an employee who speaks English, or Maria down the hall used to live in the United States, let her translate our website into English, whatever the case may be. And the words may be accurate, but the meaning does not convey. And that's a very, very critical.
Can you
So
give us an example of that?
um, I didn't pull an example, but we translated a German website, for example. It's a German CPA firm,
Mhm.
and they had very long sentences, which is more typical in German. And the words didn't, again, the words had meaning individually, but
Mhm.
you put them together, and no American would ever speak like that. Um, so what we had to advise was two things. First, that the benefits and appeals had to be very different. Benefits and appeals focus on price, on value, on efficiency, on time savings, on cost savings, and so forth.
Mhm.
So these are the appeals that work in the US. Other appeals, such as about family or about the environment, those are not as important in the US. So this is where everything has to be culturally adapted. Now, in addition, this country has approximately 43 million Latinos who speak Spanish at home. There are around 62 million, 64 million Latinos in the United States. But of those, around 43 million speak Spanish at home, making the United States the second largest Spanish country in the world after Mexico. So depending on what your product is, what your service is, where you're marketing it, it would be a very good idea also to present your website in Spanish. Now, in the same way, if you're targeting Los Angeles or Miami or New York City, for example, there are a lot of minorities in those cities, in those places. And perhaps your website should also be in Chinese or Vietnamese or Tagalog, which is Filipino, or Korean, whatever. So again, it depends on where you're going. But do be aware that this is a huge country, it's vast, and Europeans especially don't have a sense of how large we are. Imagine the distance between Lisbon and Moscow. That's the United States. And there are many subcultures within the main culture.
What is the one piece of advice that you would give a company entering the USA for the first time?
Just as the same advice I'd give to Americans going abroad. What works here does not necessarily work there. And also, do not assume that you know the United States because you've seen it in movies. Working here and living here is very, very different. There are certain traits that you have seen that will be familiar to you from movies, but again, don't assume that you know it from movies, and please do consult us, consult books, consult people about Americans. We're a very strange breed compared to the rest of the world, and it's important to understand, how we work here so that you're not shocked and you're not surprised and you don't misunderstand. Of course, it works reverse also when we go to other countries, but a lot of misunderstandings happen because people come with their native assumptions of how things are or how they should be, and that's not the way they really are in that target country.
Great advice. Phil, how can people reach you?
Two ways. By telephone, we have an office in Philadelphia in the East Coast US, and in San Francisco. I'll give you our California number, which is on our website, and that number rings to our extensions all over the country, so don't worry about time zones. Our California telephone is 415, that's the area code, or the dialing code, 415-592-0042. My extension is 107, and my email is Philip with one L. I'll say it and then spell it. Philip at Auerbach-intl.com. So it's PHILIP at AUERBACH-INTL.com.
Phil, thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be with you.